have a question for you. Why does caring for others sometimes feel so exhausting and other times feel deeply nourishing? Today on the podcast, which I'm recording on Giving Tuesday, I want to talk about the quality and importance of compassion. Compassion is a muscle, and how do we strengthen it without burning out? So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Ask Dr. Gil. I am your host, Dr. Gil Winkelman, and today on the podcast, I want to talk about compassion, and I think it's an important topic in terms of health and mental health, and it's also important in terms of sort of what's happening in our society today. And there's definitely in the United States some things happening that I would say most people would agree, regardless of your political affiliation, are concerning. And concerning in the sense that we're creating more divisions within our society instead of unification. And in the last episode, I talked about Blue Man and kind of how that idea, that concept is something that's unifying to all of us. And so I think that's an important backdrop as far as understanding how compassion and why it's important. And just as a few examples as an example, I have worked with people who are incredibly giving as individuals, and then at some point they collapse and they're not able to do it anymore. The question is what is that about, right? Why is it that that happens? It's not an easy question to answer. In my work with many of the people I went to medical school with, they have experienced burnout in a big way. And I think that that comes from a place of for many reasons, but it's not that they don't wanna help. They definitely want to do that. They just feel like they can't anymore. And so what I wanna talk about is how do we give and ground ourselves in a way that what we're doing energizes us and becomes sustainable, but isn't a sacrifice? So a couple of things that I want to talk about. Oftentimes when we talk about compassion, this idea of empathy is in there as well, and as well as sympathy. But empathy is important, and it's kind of like the driving system for for compassionate action, which is the ability to experience on some level what someone else is experiencing. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily having the exact experience. It just means that there's an aspect of I am engaged with somebody in a way that I understand where they're coming from and feel that. Now, this can be tricky because oftentimes if you're an empath or incredibly empathic, it can lead to burnout. This is where some of the burnout can come from because you're taking in everything that the other person is feeling. And so this is why sometimes the circuits in ourselves can be flooded, if you will. And there's some science behind this, by the way, in terms of how the brain waves and I've talked about this, they're called gamma waves, that those can kind of be on there. And being able to protect yourself and kind of feel that is really, really important. There's actually a book uh, by an MD called The Empath Survival Guide. And I've actually recommended this several patients over the years, and it has exercises, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the second half of the show, but it has exercises in terms of how do you protect yourself in these situations. And I think when you're moving into compassionate acts and sort of engaging with people, these are things to keep in mind. So now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the neuroscience related to compassionate action, compassionate states. One of the things I would say is that when you're compassionate, there are definitely more parasympathetic states that show up in the body. So typically what we find is this is engaging the ventral vagus activation. So you're engaged with someone, it's in a healthy parasympathetic state, you're face to face, if you will. And generally it encourages safety, openness, and connection. And your ability to stay present is a big part of this. Now, I do have another podcast on embodiment, and didn't mention this, but when you're embodied, when you're present with yourself, when you're feeling what's going on in yourself, that is one of the best protective mechanisms in terms of not getting burned out. Because when you're in that place, you can recognize, oh, this isn't mine, or I need to remove myself from the situation because this is getting too intense for me. And so there's less of a chance that you're going to get flooded in this situation. The other, in far as the neurochemistry, oxytocin is released, which is really important for bonding and trust. Serotonin is released. There's aspects of the brain that motivate us to want to help, want to engage with others. And it's not just a nice idea, compassion. It's a neurobiological skill. In other words, the more that you practice compassionate acts, and that can be active listening, by the way, with somebody, the more that your body is able to do that, and the less sort of toxic, if you will, that it becomes. And I mean, this is where I think some of the things I've talked about, meditation, neurofeedback, this is where it can help bring you into a place where you can engage better with others. And if you're a parent, like this is a must in terms of raising your children. Why is it that people might get fatigued from compassion? Well, it could just be that you're chronically stressed, and the nervous system can be stuck in fight or flight. And in that situation, you don't know that you're getting flooded. You don't know that you're in danger. You don't know that you need to disengage. So if you're in a chronic stress state, then engaging in something can be challenging because it's always going to end up that you're going to get flooded. So I think that's one of the things. I think people with a trauma history, that is definitely the case with if you haven't dealt with it in terms of chronic stress, but also sometimes caring for others activates your own wounds. And I know I've been, seeing people who they're taking care of someone who has a similar situation as they had, and they will say to me, yeah, I thought I was over this, but apparently something got triggered. And so that can be a piece of this too. And, and along those lines, sometimes people feel overly responsible in situations, which might come from trauma, by the way. And I think usually does. So it's like you feel that you're responsible for helping whatever it is that you're doing, whatever person you're trying to help as well. And that's because maybe you were trying to save one of your parents, as an example, or a sibling. And so you're reliving that experience, which is actually activating something that's buried within you. So that's another possible reason for compassion fatigue. cultural programming is a big piece of this is too, and it's rampant in healthcare. And I think that a lot of the people that I was talking about who left medicine, many of those people were really good people who kind of sacrificed themselves because that was what was expected. And oftentimes they weren't making enough money for themselves while they were helping other people. I know during the pandemic, there was a big issue with nursing, at least here in Hawaii, where nurses were just getting burnt out with everything going on. And I mean, there are multiple factors on that. So I just want to say that your inability to be compassionate all of the time is not a character failure. It's really about a physiologic overload most of the time. And the more that you can kind of ground yourself, feel embodied, and and kind of engage with that, the more capacity that you will have to be compassionate. And I'm going to take a quick break. And in the second half of the show, we're going to talk about what you can do to help be more compassionate. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Ask Dr. Gil. I am your host, Dr. Gil Winkelman. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions or comments about the show, please feel free to send me an email to info@askdrgil.com. And send me an email in terms of what episode you like if you're listening to this, because it can be really helpful for me and it will guide me in terms of what to do next year in 2026, because I'm putting stuff together for next year already. So that would be really, really helpful. So we're talking about compassion and compassion fatigue and how to be more compassionate in the world. And one of the things that I think that is missing in this is self-compassion. And I kind of alluded to this a little bit in terms of the cultural programming and good people sacrificing themselves is kind of this thought. And oftentimes self-compassion means it's time for me to take care of me. And I think that having that kindness to yourself and and sort of knowing when to say when and back off, that's the balance here, right? Even with your partner. I mean, and maybe even with your kids too. It's finding that, hey, I need some time now for me. And it's not about being self-indulgent. It's about really finding a way to refill and recharge yourself. And so I want to encourage you to be aware of that, particularly if you're one of these people who overgives, is how do I take time for myself and then, be able to recharge so that I can go off and do something again next time, whenever that next time is. So a couple of things in terms of building compassion resilience. And I'm going to talk about this in terms of micro moments first, which is, and this is really important if you're engaging with someone in the moment and it's intense. So taking deep breaths, you might even place your hand on your heart because that actually has a physiologic effect. First of all, our bodies like touch, even if it's self-touch. But putting your hand on your heart actually activates the neural pathways that go from the heart to the brain. Quick aside, there are more pathways going from the heart to the brain than from the brain to the heart. So that that can have a very much a calming effect on the body, and just by doing that. So trying to soften your jaw, which also will help your hips, by the way. Quick aside, interesting little factoid. That can also help you relax and sort of turns your sympathetic nervous system off, and it starts to downregulate that. And then long exhales. So you might breathe in for a count of 4 and exhale for a count of 8 or 12. And the number doesn't really matter, but it's just doing a longer exhale. That's going to activate the vagus nerve. So that's going to turn on parasympathetic states. And that, by the way, then allows you to know when to say no, right? It's not just about being more compassionate. And then there's definitely some somatic things that you can do as well. Just having your feet on the floor, if you're moving slow movements. I mentioned the shaking in one of the podcasts. You kind of do that. That's going to release the energies as well. So those are like the physical things that you can do to sort of reground yourself in the moment. And some of these you can do. I mean, I did some of these. You may not have even noticed me taking a deep exhale at one point here. That's how subtle it can be in terms of this work, right? And it's definitely easier if you're not talking. I'm talking right now. So it's harder, in terms of those inhale and exhales. But if we were in conversation face to face, I could be exhaling and just sort of letting things go in that moment. And oftentimes it's just a matter of just being in your body, right? And the other thing is that boundaries are also compassionate for both you and the other. In other words, you can care about something, but also do that without fixing the situation. And it's interesting. I know people who volunteer and they do the volunteering in a way that it's really sustainable for them. And sometimes I have a friend who volunteers at a battered women's shelter, and it's a really intense situation for them. And the stories they hear can be very intense, but they know that they're only doing it once a week and can let it go. And so they don't have any guilt. They know they don't have to fix anything. They're able to go there, be of service, and then leave. And I think sometimes having that distance is really, really important for people. So, and I've talked about co-regulation, being with people who are regulated, people in your community, people who you care about, people who can be compassionate to you. These are really important in terms of our capacity to have more compassion for others. And if you don't have that, I would encourage you to try and find it, whether it's in therapy or finding friends and safe friendships where you can engage in this way as well. And I think changing the internal dialogue is also really important. And I mentioned this. It's going from I have to help to I choose to help. And I think that creates some agency for you that can help prevent the burnout here. What does compassionate life look like? Well, you're grounded. There's a grounded presence. You can listen to a situation without absorbing it. You don't feel like you have to fix anything. And you know what's yours and what isn't yours. Your actions are aligned with your values as opposed to the guilt. In other words, you don't just do something because the other person needs help or you feel bad for them. You do it because there's an aspect of your value structure in alignment with what it is that they need. The main thing, if you take one thing away from this today, is that having an embodied state while you're engaging with someone helps increase your clarity, your boundaries, and your energy. And I think that that's where you, if you can be in that state, uh, that this is really an important piece in all of this. And I'm going to give you a teaser. I normally don't do this, but I'll give you a teaser for next week's show. I'm going to be talking about shadow work, which I think is really related to this, although I won't be talking about it necessarily in this, but it's the part of ourselves that we hide from ourselves. And compassion is a really important piece to healing as far as that goes. So, and if you want more information about all of this, I'm offering a workshop in January on changing your health stories. And we're going to, as part of that, talk about compassion and energy and shadow work. And I think this is a really important piece in terms of healing for people. And we're going to be coming about it from different angles. So it's applicable to a lot of different people as far as that goes. So that's what I got for you today. I hope you really enjoyed this, and I will talk to you next time.